Greetings adventurers and welcome to Loot Goblin Marketplace. Today's treasure is a glory story by the name of Oogie the Honorary Dwarf. It's a really fun story that I want to jump into, but before that, please make sure to like and subscribe as it helps the channel. Let me regale you with the tale of my party's beloved Oogie the Honorary Dwarf. Our party consisted of good friends that had known each other and a reformed that guy, and Lucas the veteran. We all had a pretty decent group consisting of dwarf warrior, a human paladin, a human warlock, a tiefling rogue, me playing a half-elf ranger, and a human mage. We were in the relatively early stages of an epic campaign and had been greeted by a sudden surge of slightly stronger enemies. What made these enemies slightly sturdier? Well, according to our DM, they had been gifted with what could only be described as slapdash metal riveted together by clumsy hands. This led us to a few leads in town that culminated in hearing of an ogre that had taken up residence in an abandoned forge and began crafting rudimentary armor and weapons for the local minions. And of course, this led to our first quest: kill the ogre, stop the attacks. After what felt like an hour of minion stomping and quest cruising, we found the forge, and we killed a few of the outlying minions to prevent an unwelcome intrusion with the upcoming boss fight. We prepared ourselves, no cleric, had to be especially careful with potion rations, added some fun to the game, and had the tiefling sneak in and make sure we could sneak up without any trouble or annoying traps going off. She gave us the all clear and we shuffled inside, praying our sneak checks held up. Inside the large forge, we found the sound of clanging metal and deep grunts. Lucas took the lead, preparing to call in a few favors from Bahamut, with Raj the dwarf following closely behind him. We turned the corner and the demon informed us that we saw a large shape moving around the anvil and smelter, which we all knew meant the ogre. He asked to roll for initiative to sneak in a shot and perhaps swing the battle in our favor, but Lucas had another plan. Lucas rolls for a diplomacy check and takes the lead by speaking with the ogre. "Why are you making armor for evil?" The ogre stopped and turned around in surprise. The DM apparently was surprised we didn't flat out attack and asked us for a moment to pen something down. After his pen stopped, he cleared his throat.
"Make armor here. Ogre not like make armor, so make armor for gobgobs, they like."
The ogre then went on to tell us about how he discovered a book about crafting and decided to try making some himself. Judging from the simplicity of the story, our DM hadn't expected us to be diplomatic and just threw together something to explain why an ogre would want to spend his time with a hammer and anvil instead of hunting down adventurers and eating goats. As the story dragged on, we learned that the ogre had been kicked out for finding a book from another culture. We slowly kinda silently agreed to avoid killing him, since the image of this 9-foot tall ogre tinkering away at an anvil to make small medium-sized armor was too funny to pass up. When the ogre got to the part where he revealed he couldn't read the book, which was a dwarven guide apparently, and was just following the pictures, Lucas decided to chime in. "Why don't you come with us? We have a dwarf who can translate the book for you, and you can learn to make better armor." The DM looked a little confused, but decided that the ogre would be allowed to be a friendly NPC in the party if we all allowed it. And thus we were joined by Oogie the crafting ogre. First thing we did once we went to town was calm the mob that had appeared and attempted to kill Oogie. 5 diplomacy checks and a bluff check, and almost a third of my gold later, the town relents and lets us stay with him for the night. Oogie was really excited by this prospect and asked if he could visit the blacksmith, which Lucas had to explain was probably not a good idea. Since there wasn't a room in town big enough to hold him, we told Oogie to sleep in the stables.
"Oogie understand. Oogie try not to make Yumis mad."
That night, before ending the session, we joked about how silly this all was, taking an ogre that didn't want to fight. We told some jokes, made a few jabs, and how we thought that the ogre was going to bite the dust and called it a session. Next session, we woke up, paid for food until the next town, and left the inn, picking up Oogie from the stables on the way out. During the journey, Oogie keeps bothering Raj the dwarf and asking about Crafty-smiths and clang tools. Now, Raj is my dude, bro, I've known for years, and even though this was obviously bothering him answering every question, he at least tries to be nice to the insistent pestering. In hindsight, this was probably our DM's attempt to leave Oogie behind so he could get back to the focus. We managed to persist and keep him with us to the next town. This time, deciding we cannot afford to argue Oogie into town every time and spend half our income. Being a ranger, I offer to set up camp just outside the town's borders where we can keep Oogie and hunt down pelts for extra income. Raj offers to stay in camp with me and Oogie, with Lucas heading into town for the temple and the rogue, wizard and warlock search for quests. As we set up the tents, I ask if it's possible to use Oogie as a deterrent against mobs in the local area. The DM allows a roll, and with the 17, says that Oogie's natural musk alerts the other monsters in the area to stay away. Raj stayed behind as I picked off some local wildlife for our dinner. While I hunted, Oogie asked Raj more questions about the book.
"How Oogie make?"
"You can't. That needs a bar of iron and a forge."
"Oogie make forge?"
I don't think there's enough materials around here to do that. The wizard returns to our camp, letting the rogue and the warlock threaten a local mayor for a better reward. The wizard proposed he make a temporary forge for Oogie using some spells and his fire magic. As for the iron, the group has a bag of holding full of old items we had earned from defeating a minor demon. Oogie was ecstatic at the idea, asked if he could make armor for his dwarfy friend who read Oogie book. Not seeing the harm in such an idea, we agreed, and Oogie set to work. In the morning, we had awoken Lucas the rogue, and the warlock had also returned to camp. After we explained the plan for the newest quest, we gathered up our things and decided to wake Oogie. Turns out the poor bastard had spent half the night banging away at the old pile of scrap and made a chess piece, aptly titled by the DM as Oogie's Chess Piece O Protect, which was described as a hodgepodge of metal sheets roughly slapped together. Raj, being such a dude bro, offered to wear it despite it having one less protection point against Slash. As the DM described Oogie's dumb smiling face, I felt a pang of guilt for making fun of him. Many quests continue with Oogie the crafting ogre, who had a neat ability to craft a piece of armor or weapon every 1d4 nights, and the DM would use 2d20s to determine the item he crafted. After 2 months of in-game time passed, Oogie had made us some slightly less than useful items with no signs of improving. Sometimes we'd sell the things he'd made, other times we wore them for Oogie, just to make him happy. By the 5th quest, I had Oogie's wristy gird gloves. When we finally located one of the main storyline quests, we also happened to pass by a temple of Moradin, who had 24 forges surrounding it for his followers to craft weapons for paladins. It was like trying to hold a 9-foot-tall child back from a toy store.
Oogie see crafty-smiths. Maybe one teach Oogie make better armor.
Best not to rush them, Oogie, Raj said, rolling for a diplomacy check to calm Oogie down.
But Oogie want make better armor for friends.
That hit us hard, and Lucas, being the de facto head, took the lead. Oogie, you can't enter forges, they're only for Moradin's craftsmen.
What mean?
Only dwarfs are allowed in. Oogie seems a little confused before whimpering like a hurt animal. We decided to drag him back to the tent outside of town and let him calm down there, but not before he made a decision looking at those forges.
Oogie will become dwarf.
The next few sessions were filled with a mix of heartache and heartwarming. Oogie tried extra hard to make better armor, and Raj now found a full-time hobby teaching Oogie to read dwarvish script. Every now and again, Oogie's efforts paid off, and his armor would be as good, if not slightly above what we were wearing, but still was terribly built and barely held together. Just a result of something so big not having the dexterity to make the fine-tuning of professionally crafted armor. Every now and again, Oogie would ask the group, specifically Raj, how he was doing.
Oogie dwarf now?
Not yet, I don't think. Maybe if you try harder.
Oogie can do.
Oogie seemed to become more determined every day, clanging away at his magic forge, combining what little scrap we found for him to throw together. He also began asking Lucas for help with contacting Moradin to become a dwarf. We tried doing what we could in our spare time, but we also had to focus on the big bad evil guy of the setting, since we didn't want to derail the whole thing for our DM, who had been a pretty chill dude up until this point about the whole thing. We told Oogie that we had to fight a big bad guy, and that we need to focus on saving the world. Oogie seemed to understand and asked for a little bit of metal, promising to stop asking if we got it for him. We relented and turned our last piece of metal for him in exchange for him helping us on the quest. The DM told us that Oogie isn't designed for the combat levels we were at by this point, but he could help a little if we were careful. Worst case scenario, we pull him back, Lucas performs lay on hands, and we're good. We slowly uncovered a conspiracy that ties an ancient forgotten god, one who was worshipped as the god of destruction and undoing. Pretty sweet stuff as we kept getting closer and closer. The armor from Oogie stopped showing up, but it was okay. We found cheap armor. We made an effort to save the pieces that Oogie had crafted for us out of loyalty to our curious big Crafty-smith friend. Oogie never seemed to ask for metal anymore, but we heard him clanging every night before we could fall asleep. The lessons continued with Raj teaching Oogie more and more about Moradin, but he couldn't answer the most spiritual of them all, only being a warrior who happened to be a dwarf. For the questions about the god's methods, Lucas was there to answer his questions.
How Oogie talk to Moradin?
You pray and ask for guidance.
Moradin show Oogie how make better armor?
If he sees it fit to, he shall guide you.
How Oogie know?
You won't, but you have to believe.
Oogie believe.
After a while, Oogie began splitting the time between speaking with Lucas about Moradin, which he thought was the quickest way to becoming a dwarf, and practicing his rudimentary dwarvish, which he used to read his first book. He faded more and more into our group's project, a background character. We still cared for him, but we couldn't just afford to babysit him as we leveled up. He also insists on having Lucas ask Moradin if he was a dwarf yet.
Moradin make Oogie dwarf now?
That is not my place to tell Oogie.
Oogie pray, but Moradin not talking. Did Oogie do it wrong?
It is not my place to tell, but I believe the gods work in mysterious ways.
Oogie understand. Make better armor soon for friends.
As we cleared out more and more dungeons, we started to realize that we had made a mistake dragging Oogie along. He just couldn't keep up to our leveling, and he couldn't get any useful perks. He started to become a hassle. By the time we were at the final stretch of the quest, facing the ancient cult summoning the god, we had a silent agreement to leave Oogie behind lest he get hurt. We executed the play perfectly. The last town before the invasion, we told Oogie to stay with the magic forge and practice alone for a few days, and that we were going to get him more metal to work with. Of course, the big lug agreed. After casting a spell to keep the fires going for a week, we set out, Oogie clanging away happily. We didn't look back, but you can be damn sure we didn't leave with a smile. 2 hours into the dungeon, we knew that we had messed up. First off, we failed one too many sneaks and bluffs, and that meant the cultists had finished their mission in summoning the God of Undoing. He was essentially Orcus without the secrecy. Pragmatic as hell, he immediately began to cast a bunch of seals and spells that trap us in the room and then debuffs our armor to the point it's unraveling back into scrap. Our warlock was protecting our wizard with a low-level demon. Our rogue was stealthily trying to pickpocket the dead cultists for anything that might help. Raj and Lucas led the attack, and I was firing a volley every chance I got, rolling for anything that might break his ungodly armor. We were using everything and had run out of potions. Lucas had no more lay on hands available thanks to a dozen cultists cutting off his prayers to Bahamut. It was only now that we regretted not having a cleric. The god approaches Lucas and Raj and without a hint of monologue proceeds to wreck their shit. He breaks Raj's armor, shatters the divine shield Lucas was using, and then readies his next round of spells. And then the DM rolled for initiative. From behind me, a large metal sphere flew out and thumped the god. Not enough to hurt him, but it was a high enough roll to disrupt his spell.
Oogie done crafting.
From behind us, standing in the large doorway, stood an ogre, clad in terribly mismatched set of armor, emblazoned with a hammer of Moradin on its chest piece. In his right hand, an enormous hammer the size of a stone column, and made of the same dented metal. Suddenly, all the knights of clanging made sense. Oogie wanted to help, and we just thought he was a burden. Oogie charged forward, rolling a 17 on his first roll, and with the god suffering from stupefaction because of his entrance, landed his first hit. It was the most damaging hit we had done to the god, and it had been dealt by an ogre that was wearing what looked like a rejected arts and crafts project of a preschooler. We had sat there for a moment in stunned silence as the DM described the armor and hammer he carried, calling it a crude mimicry of the holy hammers and suits of armor worn by the paladins of Moradin.
You hurt Oogie's friends. No more.
3 hits, each doing a little less than the last, but still doing something. During this affair, the rogue finally hit a nat 20 and found the cultist leader's emergency reagents to shut the whole spell down on his corpse. She rolled for a toss to Lucas, who had enough armor to take another hit if he needed to get close. Oogie roared and attempted to grapple, using his natural modifiers to hold him, a god of destruction, for a brief moment.
Oogie paladin now too. Help Moradin help Lucas like real dwarf.
We felt a pang of guilt. We had left this guy behind so he couldn't bother us with the quest to become a dwarf. But there he was, wearing that stupid smile, wearing that stupid armor, and pulling that stupid move. Lucas sighed heavily and we all rolled for our respective abilities. There was a brief moment where we thought that we had this thing down until Lucas and our warlock stopped and realized the flaw in the plan. Oogie still isn't high level. With that, our turn ended and the DM rolled for the god's attack versus Oogie's grapple. I wish I could say Oogie had a nat 20. I wish I could say that his modifier gave him just enough to hold the god down, but I can't. The god rolled 14, Oogie rolled 5. Then the DM informed us that not only did the god break the grapple, but now had stunned Oogie long enough to cast a spell of destruction, point blank at Oogie's chest. As I said before, very rarely did Oogie craft armor that matched the level stats of armor we bought in town. He was wearing armor that was almost 2 levels below his current level, and his current level was lower than any of us. Oogie collapsed in a heap, and the god turned to face us. For those that don't know, our warlock was once that guy. He had a major falling out with the DM and Lucas and reformed himself. He never got along with Lucas, but he was still willing to not be a jerk as long as Lucas didn't call him out on stuff again. This was the only time I saw our warlock look across the table and ask Lucas for help. I need a favor, and I need it now. Lucas moved to cover the warlock, who charged forward with a series of demons in tow. Our warlock may have been a jerk a tad, but he was a jerk with a good amount of demons on call for favors. He called every single one of them in. The DM, knowing what this meant to us, didn't bother to ask for our rolls. Every demon snuck a hit, and with the dwarf at his heels, a wizard freezing his balls, and a ranger firing arrows into every square inch of flesh exposed on his hide, it was no wonder the god never saw our rogue behind him with a sealing amulet and a scroll of desolation from the cultist leader. Before the god even returned to the astral plane, we rushed to Oogie, who was managing to hang on by the merest thread of life possible. Lay on hand was next to useless. With no potions, we all knew what we were watching. We were watching Oogie die, and even after we had killed a god, conquered dungeons, and leveled evil kingdoms, we couldn't even save our friend.
Oogie sorry he got in way.
You didn't. You did great.
Oogie sorry he not make good armor like dwarf.
We love your armor, big guy. Don't think like that. I've never seen Lucas try so hard to call in a favor for Bahamut or roll so desperately for a miracle. Even the warlock was searching his sheets for a demon who might help without too hefty of a price. To no avail.
Oogie know why Moradin no talk to Oogie. Oogie hands too big and clumsy, so Oogie not make small armor nice and pretty.
It's fine, Oogie. Just hang on. We're going to save you.
Oogie knew he not good Crafty-smith, and when he saw Dwarf Temple and Crafty-smiths look at him funny, but Oogie try anyways.
I'm not a very touchy-feely guy, and I know Oogie was a figment of our imaginations, but when you see Lucas, a veteran who had lost his left leg to a bomb before he was 25, holding back tears, you know it wasn't just me being blubbery when I say we were tearing up.
Oogie not good Crafty-smith with armors and weapons, but Oogie good Crafty-smith at something. Oogie can make good story.
At this point, our rogue hid behind her screen, and the warlock just stared down at his sheet, having stopped searching for his demon to deal with.
Oogie think orcs make good armor and stories, which why Oogie wanted to be dwarf, but Oogie understand he not dwarf, and he never be dwarf ever.
Oogie's breathing began to slow, and Raj grabbed his hand, holding it as best he could. You could be a dwarf, Oogie. You could be the best ogre dwarf in the land. Oogie closed his eyes and smiled.
Oogie like that. He go sleep now.
And like that, our party lost Oogie the Crafty-smith, and we all think a little something died with him inside all of us. We looted the dungeon, killed the remaining cultists, and made our way back to the nearest village, one that happened to have a temple and forge for followers of Moradin. When we entered the town, we all took notice that the forge was louder than ever, and half the town seemed to be gathered around the temple. Naturally curious, we moved closer. At first, we were rolling to push through until Lucas used a favor for Bahamut to project a holy shout and clear the path. We got closer and closer to the entrance, and we saw more and more dwarves, some wearing the emblem of Moradin, others in attire of his sacred blacksmiths. As we reached the entrance, knowing we weren't allowed in, we asked the priest if he could tell us what the fuss was. The priest asked us if we had been involved with the destruction of a god of undoing. Of course we were, so he led us inside. Deep inside the mountain, past the pillars, and past the gorgeously carved hallways and stone arches, and into the deepest parts of the forge's sanctum, we witnessed dozens of dwarves mill around, throwing around orders and commands in ancient dwarvish. The priest pointed to what had been causing the ruckus. We received divine word that Moradin the Creator had ordered a statue to be erected to honor the fall of the god. The dwarves tugged out a large metal and marble statue from a crafting vault, and the appointment of a new apprentice to his mighty forges in the halls of his domain. There, crafted by the finest dwarven artisans, was an enormous 30-foot-tall statue of Oogie, complete with a golden hammer, a silver book of dwarven crafting, and a beard befitting a dwarf. Oogie Goodcrafter, Honorary Dwarf of Moradin, and Crafty-smith of the Forge. That was the first time I cried playing D&D. After a year of sessions in Dungeons & Dragons, I elected to have my hero, the half-elven ranger, retire into godhood as a deity of honorable hunting. Upon ascension, I asked for a favor. As great as my weapons were in the mortal realms, the fact was that I needed something more suited for godly duties, so they needed to be reworked, and I knew exactly who I wanted to remake them. Moradin welcomed me into his forges, obviously happy to have his apprentices practice with their skills in crafting weapons fit for gods. When I asked if it would be possible to have someone specific work on it, he knew exactly who I wanted, and led me to a grand hall where dozens of dwarves were gathered around a large figure, clanging away happily at an anvil. There, wearing his iconic slapdash armor over an enormously enlarged dwarf robe, was Oogie wearing the biggest, dumbest smile you could ever imagine. He looked up, smiled, and picked me up, laughing and hugging as I tried not to cry. When he finally put me down, I showed him what I wanted to show him ever since he left our group. I held up my hands and showed him what I was wearing for celestial armor. There on my hands was Oogie's wristy gird gloves, battered from years of use and adventures, and raised to the level of a god's armor. And that, TG, is the story of Oogie the Honorary Dwarf and Crafty-smith of the Forge. So the very first time I heard this story, it really moved me, and even when I reread it, it's still a very emotional journey. I think this just shows how beautiful the hobby really can be, and I hope everyone that plays Dungeons & Dragons can have a story like this one day as well. Make sure to leave your comments because I want to hear what this story means to you guys, and if you have any like it, I'd love to read it. And make sure to share with others and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video. Thanks for stopping by. Farewell for now. Community shoutout time. Thank you for Bloodsmith Gamer for supporting the channel. Your contributions mean a lot to me and I hope to have more members join over time.